let's settle this once and for all. Which Pro iPhone should you actually get? The 16 Pro, 15 Pro, or 14 Pro? Now, I'm not gonna drown you in specs or bore you with benchmarks because let's be real, no one's out here comparing numbers while using their phone at Starbucks. What matters is the day-to-day experience, and I've used all of these iPhones long enough to break it down for you. Let's start with the obvious. They look super similar, right? But trust me, they feel a bit different. Same family, slightly different personalities. Take the display, for example. On paper, almost identical across the board. The 14 Pro and 15 Pro, literally the same. 6.1 inches, 2000 nits of peak brightness, Pro Motion. You can't really tell them apart when you're just staring at them side by side. Now, the 16 Pro sneaks in a bit of a twist. Slightly bigger at 6.3 inches. Yeah, not a huge difference, but noticeable when you are binge watching or doom scrolling at 3 a.m. And speaking of late night doom scrolling, can drop to 1 nit of brightness, which is perfect for when you're trying to fry your brain with TikToks without blinding yourself. All these displays share one huge problem, and if you've been using any of these phones, you already know where I'm going with this. No anti-reflective coating. Why is Apple so afraid of it? I don't know. Well, I get it with the 14 Pro. Maybe it wasn't on their radar yet, but by the time the 15 Pro dropped, was already a bit frustrating. And now with the 16 Pro, honestly, it's just disappointing. Because without that coating, the peak brightness doesn't even feel as bright as it's supposed to. And it's not like 2000 nits is mind-blowing high by today's flagship standards. Google's Pixel is hitting nearly 3000 nits, and Samsung settled in the 2600 nits range. So while 2000 is fine for most situations, and honestly, the 14 Pro and 16 Pro can handle outdoor environments about the same, the issue is how long each phone can sustain that brightness. With the 14 Pro, it was like a quick flash, bright for a couple of minutes before the phone would get hot and dim down. Those 2000 nits were more like a brief flex. The 15 Pro handled it better, keeping that brightness a bit longer, but the 16 Pro takes it further, staying brighter without overheating as quickly. So yeah, while the numbers look the same, the experience between these displays is not. Now let's talk about what you're left with when you set aside brightness, the display itself. And this is where design and bezels come into play. Funny enough, the 14 Pro, despite having a smaller 6.1-inch screen, feels bigger than the 16 Pro. Why? Those thicker bezels and sharper edges make the 14 Pro feel bulkier. The 16 Pro, with its slimmer bezels and rounded edges, feels way more modern and compact, even though it technically has a bigger display. Now, I'll admit, the difference between the 15 Pro and 16 Pro isn't huge. You won't notice it unless you're comparing side by side, but it's there. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. I know, everyone's tired of hearing about iPhone design, but just hang with me for a second, because I need to bring back that point I made earlier about the 16 Pro feeling almost identical in size to the 14 Pro. Thanks to those flat, hard edges, the 14 Pro just feels bulky, chunky even. The 15 Pro though, it's the smallest of the bunch and the most comfortable to hold. Seriously, it's got this great in-hand feel, and guess what? It's also the lightest. Now, both the 16 Pro and 14 Pro are a bit heavier, despite the 14 Pro being technically thinner. Yeah, the dimensions on these phones are kind of all over the place, but here's the bottom line. You will feel pretty comfortable using any of these three. It just comes down to how much weight and bulk you're willing to deal with. I remember telling you that no matter the materials the phone is made out of, I still use cases. To be extra sure my new iPhone survives any drop, I've settled on the Casetify Ultra Bounce case. Casetify sponsoring this video. The case itself isn't just about style, it's built to handle some serious drops. We're talking 10x military grade protection with a crazy drop protection of up to 32.8 feet. Yeah, so if your phone's ever done that slow motion slip out of your hands, this case has got your back. It's all thanks to those expanded ultra bounce corners that absorb impact really well. This is definitely the most protective and versatile case I ever had. And that versatility comes from the ultra bounce attachment system. This isn't just some gimmick. It completely changes how you carry your phone. It's got an ultra bounce utility lanyard and an ultra bounce carabiner so you can attach your phone in all sorts of ways. The lanyard is this multifunctional phone strap with dual lobster clasps, and the carabiner has a G-hook clasp made of durable and lightweight aluminum. Clip it to your pants, wear it crossbody, or secure it to your wrist, it's all possible. I tested out in a bunch of different situations, and honestly, it's pretty impressive how versatile it is. Whether you're hiking, hiking or just running errands in the city, keeps your phone right where you need it, especially when your pockets are full. The attachment system really shines when you need your hands free, but still want to grab your phone in a second. So if you're someone like me who's always on the go, or you just want next level protection and convenience, the Ultra Bounce case is definitely worth checking out. Go to my description box and click the link. It's casetify.com/autumnwiner to get 15% off your order today. You might be thinking, well, the 14 Pro isn't that far off from its younger siblings. There's one thing that makes it feel like a relic from the past, the Lightning port. Yeah, I hear Android users laughing, but trust me, the convenience of USB-C is insane. On the 14 Pro, that port is basically a charging hall. Meanwhile, on the 15 and 16 Pro, it's a whole different ballgame. I can connect hard drives, cameras, microphones, even external displays, and the file transfer speeds, Type-C is the GOAT, no question. If you are thinking long-term, investing in the phone with a port is a no-brainer. Speaking of file transfers, I shoot a lot of photos and videos on my iPhone, so transferring them to my Mac is a daily thing for me. On the 15 and 16 Pro, plug in the cable, select the files, and in seconds, boom, done. On the 14 Pro, well, you've got enough time to make yourself a cup of coffee while you wait. If you are serious about photos and videos, that Type-C port should really matter to you, because these cameras practically beg to be used, and that's where you'll start to see the real differences between these phones. Cameras, let's be real, they are the selling point of any smartphone nowadays. And while all three of these iPhones might look solid on paper, rocking 48 megapixel main sensors, the truth is that the 15 Pro and 16 Pro are leagues ahead of the 14 Pro. Let's break it down. First off, 15 Pro and 16 Pro shoot default photos at 24 megapixels, while the 14 Pro sticks to 12. You don't need me to explain that more megapixels equal more detail, and trust me, those extra details matter, especially when you're zooming in, cropping, or printing your photos. And let's not even get into the fancy new photo styles on the 16 Pro. The overall image processing on the 15 Pro and 16 Pro is just superior. Highlights, shadows, skin tones, dynamic range, newer phones handle all that better. Now, don't get me wrong, the 14 Pro still takes solid shots, lots of contrast, vivid colors, and it doesn't disappoint, but the 15 Pro, it's better reducing lens flares, treats shadows with more care, just packs in more detail overall. The 16 Pro though, out of the box, it's actually tricky. Captures so much detail in the shadows, the photos can look flat and lose that punchy contrast we all love. And that's where the new tone adjustment comes in. Set it to -0.5 and boom, you get the contrast back. Maybe even go to -0.7 if you want extra pop. On the 14 Pro, you're basically at the mercy of Apple's vision for what your photo should look like. The 16 Pro, you've got way more control before you even take a shot. The 15 Pro falls somewhere in between with better processing but less control compared to the 16. And we can't skip over the 16 Pro's upgraded 48 megapixel ultra-wide camera. It captures more light and just looks stunning, especially for macros. Every tiny detail pops. Sure, you might get a little vignetting in some shots, but honestly, it adds character. The 15 and 14 Pro also handle macros really well, but the 16 Pro is on a whole nother level for those up-close shots. Now, here's where things get real interesting. The zoom lens. On the 14 and 15 Pro, you've got a 3x telephoto, but in the 16 Pro, it's bumped up to 5x. For some people, this might feel like a downgrade. Why? Because 5x, while amazing for those dramatic, compressed background shots, isn't always practical for day-to-day shooting. On the 14 and 15 Pro, you've got a clean zoom progression. 0.5x, 1x, 2x, 3x. It's predictable, it's smooth, and it doesn't need much AI trickery to fill in the gaps. With 5x in the 16 Pro, there's a lot more computational work going on between 2x and 5x, which can sometimes lead to less natural looking photos. For me though, I love the 5x. All the best shots, those creative cinematic frames come from zoom. The way it compresses the foreground and background, chef's kiss. That's why I was so into the 15 Pro Max with its 5x zoom. Speaking of the Pro Max models, if you're going for those, the 14 Pro Max will have a 3x zoom, while both the 15 and 16 Pro Max stick with the 5x. Otherwise, everything I've said about the cameras applies across the board. And since we are deep in camera talk, let's shift gears to the buttons, specifically the camera control button. Now, I use it, I like it, but honestly, I struggle to put it in the advantages column. First off, on the regular 16 Pro, its placement is a bit, awkward. Like, sure, it's probably the best spot they could have chosen, but you still have to train your hand to get used to it. On the 16 Pro Max, it's definitely better, but can still feel a little fiddly at times. As for how it works, it's hit or miss. I can totally see people being annoyed by the learning curve, the force you need to apply to trigger it, plus the swipe and inertia when you're zooming. Sometimes just using the camera app's on-screen controls feels easier and way more precise. So yeah, the button is more of a cool feature if you get used to it, but I wouldn't call it essential. Which brings me to the 15 Pro and 14 Pro. Honestly, they're not missing out by not having this button. And that kind of seems like the topic for the 14 Pro. It doesn't have the action button either, and after using that on the 15 Pro for a year, I can tell you, you can totally live without it. Sure, I tried all sorts of shortcuts and setups with it, but in the end, I just decided to open a shortcut folder. You can do the same by double tapping the back glass. Free life hack for you. So yeah, if I were the average iPhone buyer, I wouldn't let the number of buttons dictate my choice. More buttons don't always mean a better experience. It's all about what works for you. I've got to give credit where it's due. The camera control button does shine when it comes to shooting videos, especially if you want to nail those smooth zoom ins. And speaking of videos, this is where the 16 Pro absolutely demolishes the 15 Pro and 14 Pro. I mean, we're talking 4K at 120 FPS in Dolby Vision. That's a feature you don't see every day, and the quality is insane. Most people probably won't use this feature on the regular, but if you're serious about learning how to shoot on your phone, this high-res slow is a game changer. The 14 Pro really starts to show its age with video. Sure, it's fine for casual use, but the 15 and 16 Pro can shoot in log, which is perfect if you want to color grade your footage and make it look cinematic. The 14 Pro, on the other hand, locks in its color profile and processing, so you're pretty much stuck with what you should. For everyday use, like capturing memories, it will still do the job just fine, but if you're aiming for something more professional, the 15 and 16 Pro take the win hands down. Now let's get to the spicy part, battery life. If you've seen my 14 Pro videos, you already know that the battery on that phone was a total disaster. It was losing battery health like crazy, and you're probably gonna need to replace it after a year or two. The 15 Pro, way better. After a year, it's barely lost any health, and I'm guessing the 16 Pro will be the same story. If you want top tier battery life though, just go for the Pro Max. That's what I ended up doing. The smaller models, they will last you less than a full day, and that's just not enough for me. The Pro Max versions, you're looking at a solid day and a half, give or take an hour. But the real question we have to tackle is, what about longevity? And yeah, this is where things get a little tricky. We're not just talking about the phones as they are today. We have to consider the future, specifically Apple Intelligence. I've installed the iOS 18.1 beta. Let's be real, there is still no image playground, no visual intelligence, no next-gen Siri, and a ton of other stuff Apple promised us. And yeah, bugs and lags at the moment. Now, 15 Pro and 16 Pro will get all those cool Apple Intelligence features, while 14 Pro won't. And if you are a tech geek, that's a massive deal breaker. Sure, the 14 Pro is still a fantastic phone, but if you want to be at the cutting edge of tech, it's not gonna cut it. It's simply not powerful enough for what's coming next. When iOS 18 drops, the 14 Pro's version will feel more like what the 10R is running. Functional, but nowhere near as exciting or feature-packed as what you will get on the 15 and 16 Pro. On the flip side, if we're talking pure software support, the 14 Pro will still get iOS updates for years. It's got the power to run iOS 19, 20, 21, no problem there, and you won't see any issues with performance or app compatibility as long as your battery holds up. But when it comes to the future of AI, the 15 Pro and 16 Pro are where it's at. Both will keep getting all the coolest AI-driven features in the upcoming iOS updates, and the great news is that the 15 Pro is just as good as the 16 Pro in that department, unless Apple comes out with some features that absolutely need that new capture button. The 15 Pro is gonna hang right there with the 16 Pro for a good while. Right, so if you thought the competition was already intense, buckle up because now we're getting into features per dollar. Things are about to get spicy. We all know the 16 Pro goes for $999 at Apple, no surprises there, but the 15 Pro, which is almost the same phone, is hovering around $770, $800 in Amazon right now. That's a solid deal. And then there's the 14 Pro. Prices in this bad boy are all over the place. You'll see it listed for $700, $660, and if you're really lucky, as low as $600. Now, let me tell you, getting a phone with an awesome display, killer cameras, a modern design, and years of iOS support for $600? That's wild. I mean, Apple still sells the regular iPhone 14 for about the same price, and that phone isn't even in the same league as the 14 Pro. Even the iPhone 15, starting at $700, only really has one advantage, the Type-C port. So if you can grab the 14 Pro for $600, I would call that a steal. But if you're lucky enough to find the 15 Pro for around $750, which happens during sales, I would say that's the sweet spot. The 15 Pro has the perfect blend of new tech, features, and value, but yeah, you might have to do a little deal hunting. Now let's talk Pro Max models. The 16 Pro Max, that's gonna run you a cool $1,200, a lot, I know. Meanwhile, the 15 Pro Max is listed around $990 in Amazon, almost the same price as the regular 16 Pro. But here's where it gets fun. The 14 Pro Max, $870. And if you're patient enough, you might even snag one for $700. At that price, it's hard to argue against it. If you don't care about Type-C or all the latest AI stuff, the 14 Pro is the best bang for your buck. But if it were up to me, I would go with 15 Pro or 15 Pro Max. Slightly better value for money compared to the 16 Pro, even though the 16 Pro edges it out in a lot of ways. So that's where I stand. Be sure to check out our long-term 15 Pro review, and as always, thanks for watching. Catch you in the next one.